All right, off you go.
I just want to go in order. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Okay, so, well, first off, for the first one, maybe we just go around really quickly and say whether we put yes or no as if it was an active definition and maybe explain that. Okay. I put yes, it was.
I said no.
So no one also.
I also said
I said, I mean, I was kind of like a politician, but I think more of my examples lean towards yes.
Me too. Yes.
Do you want to share why that we did that?
Okay, well, my main reason was because looking back at all of his advice that he gives his friends, it seemed like he was kind of leaning towards, he wanted them to be really cunning and sneaky and, well, he's really direct a lot in his words and what he says, and one quote is on page 57, he says, he knows how to color his actions and to be a great liar and deceiver. So, obviously that's saying, you know, you want to be tricky, cunning, like, deceptive. But just really like how direct he was kind of made me think that yes, this is an accurate definition.
I disagree with you because I feel like the way he approaches politics in general is more based on reality rather than how people should, how they want them to be. And I feel like because of this view, a lot of people look at this book and feel like these are his ideas, these are all the things you should do, and it's a lot of the things he says are kind of evil. But on 56, it says that everyone realizes how praiseworthy it is for a prince to honor his word and to be straightforward rather than crafty in his dealings. But then it also goes on to say that this is not always reality and this is not always a possibility to achieve your goals. And I feel like that he wanted success of the government and the state to rule, and maybe these actions weren't always moral, but they were what had to be done to accomplish his goals.
I agree with you. I just don't think it conjures up a negative connotation because in all he wants the prince to be a very good person. And on page 57, he says, I don't remember exactly where it is, but he says something about you must be like a fox in order to do well in life. So you kind of have to conform to the actions of others around you, like in politics nowadays, with the corruption in politics. In order to do well by others, sometimes you have to become that negative connotation, but you don't necessarily have to be, if that makes sense.
I just think it's unfair to call him evil just because of his political beliefs. Because I don't agree with him, but I don't feel like he's doing anything wrong just by sharing what he feels. Like, I mean, like I was a low mark when I took the quiz, but I don't think many of these things are awful. I just don't necessarily agree.
I mean, I didn't feel that necessarily he was saying to go out and be evil. I thought that he was saying like it's okay to be evil, to like be successful as a ruler. Like it's on page 76 in my book, which is in chapter 18, and he says he should not deviate from what is good if possible, but he should know how to enter into evil when necessity commands. Which is like he's kind of saying like Machiavellian, like you're not like maybe necessarily like an evil person and get pleasure from like doing like harm to people and things like that, but you're more like kind of manipulating reality just to like further yourself and like your country, but if you have to be evil to do that. So he's like good at the same time accepting evil.
I agree with that. I'd say like his whole thing was like the end justifies the means or whatever, and like he's saying like you have to act deceitfully sometimes. That's a word. Yeah. Sometimes to like get what you want, which is inherently bad, but he's saying like be a good person, but for show, basically. So yeah, I have to say that's pretty evil.
I don't know, just to add on to what Diana said, I just found this where he said in order to maintain his state, he's often forced to act in defiance of good faith, of charity, kindness, and religion. And I feel like these are all things that we should aspire to be, like kind and charitable and faithful, but sometimes it's not really a possibility to be these, especially if you have to look out for the good of everyone as a reward.
Well, I was just wondering, I found a quote on page 56 which says, nonetheless, contemporary experience shows that princes who have achieved great things have been those who have given their word lightly, who have known how to trick around their kind, and who in the end have overcome those abiding by honest principles. For the people who said, who disagree with the definition, because in my opinion, I think that this is saying that, because obviously Machiavelli is trying to give advice to the prince and how to become a successful ruler. And so I think that he's saying, obviously, you kind of have to almost cheat your way through life and be deceitful. May not like do what everybody always thinks is right. But do you guys, like after hearing that, do you maybe think that it is like a proper definition to say that a Machiavelli can be an evil person or cunning?
Yeah, a little bit. When you bring that up, I can possibly see that.
I don't know, I still feel like the word Machiavellian, like today we think of it as a negative word, but in the context of this society, I feel like it was just a word to or maybe, I don't even know, what he's saying, his rules that he's saying, I think that was just a way for people to accomplish what they want in that society, and maybe, I can't remember who said someone said, the ends justify the means. I feel like if it was a good end, then negative actions maybe weren't that big of a deal.
Yeah,
That makes sense. And also, I think when he's saying this about the quote you just gave, his patrons were the Medicis, and maybe he was using them sort of as an example there.
Also, and like on the website, which is like notable biographies that like talked about him, I went on that when I was referring this question, and like it talked a little about when he was writing The Prince, and like negative in this question it talks about like negative connotations such as immoral, and like it talked about how like his overall goal was kind of to like reconstruct the government and turn it to like a moral like and politically correct place, and so like I feel like the Machiavellian like doesn't lack morals if they're trying to like make politics like moral as much as you can.
Yeah, I agree with that. Makes sense.
You guys may want to move on. Okay.
So when Machiavelli said that rivers are meant to be controlled but cannot be trusted, I kind of felt like that statement was a good representation of his views of a true view, because rivers are wild in nature and you can force them to go one way, like with dams or levee or dredging, stuff like that. But you can never really control them. You can't really control which way they flow. You can't control like their particular actions. And I think that's the same way with people. We can force someone to do something, but we can never like truly take away their rights, because they're always going to fight for them. And I guess we see that throughout history in different situations, such as like civil rights in our country and women's rights. And I feel like you can never take away someone's rights completely.
Yeah, I have the same kind of view on this question as what you had said, how it's referring to really just kind of the nature of mankind and how just the way we are as humans is that if we're being suppressed by like opposing forces, then eventually we're going to kind of want to like go against them and just be really subversive. And also on page 79, Machiavelli says that the inconsistencies of rivers is caused by pure nature. And I think this is similar with mankind, is that this idea that we want to, not be controlled is just caused by the pure nature of who we are.
So like, I thought that like, I'm like agreeing with you guys. I thought that it's like you can control a man and a river to some extent, but really you're not controlling them, you're just influencing them by like imposing laws or like creating dams, because like ultimately, like when it says come up with a metaphor, I'm not exactly sure if this is a metaphor, but I thought of an example. So the person like in a horror movie that's always like gonna go into the dark closet, they like don't go into that dark closet, but it's like their human nature, they want to go into there. So they're like going to no matter what you tell them, even though you like influence them, but like human nature, like you can't exactly stop someone from doing what they want to do or what they think is right, because they're ultimately probably just gonna do it anyways.
And
Okay. I was just gonna say that was really good. I thought, like that metaphor you said.
Oh.
It's like it does, because it like human nature can't be controlled.
I think it's kind of like unfortunate that that has to be like Machiavelli's view, like that he can't trust his people, so he has to use force and cruelty against them to like control them. And I mean, I don't know. I just think it's not a very. It's a really honest view, but I don't think it's a good view for a ruler to have of their people.
But it is a very honest view of man and his instincts, because you can like take, well, there's like the saying, you can take a boy out of the south, but you can't take the south out of the boy. And if you've ever moved from like one extreme to something else, like I went from here to Texas this summer, and it was just totally different. I mean, like they would try to change me in this one way, like my language and like how I talk and some of my slang, and it just wouldn't happen. So I just feel like it's a very honest view. And then you like the same thing with nature. You can cut down the trees and you can like change the river, the flow. You can dredge it, make it deeper. But eventually, it's going to return to its same glory, like its same depth. And the trees are eventually going to sprout back up, no matter what happens or what man does to try to control it.
My metaphor is kind of similar to both of yours, but I said you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. because I feel like you can force someone to do something, but like force someone to go somewhere, like to go take one path, but you can't actually make them do something. I don't know. I'm trying to make this work, but and I just feel like that's kind of representative of that.
It's also going back to, I guess, what Claire said about how it's kind of unfortunate. Like in chapter 20, he says something like, "For even though you have fortresses, they will not save you if the people hate you, because once the people have taken up arms, they will never lack outsiders to come to their assistance." It's almost like that is really like unfortunate, because it's like, you know, like your people are you're supposed to be ruling them and helping them, and you're like trying to help them in your country. At the same time, you can never trust them, so you have to like just fear them all the time.
I think another take on this question is when he says that rivers are meant to be controlled but can't be trusted. On 79, it says that when they are flowing quietly, one cannot take precautions, so that when the river is in flood, they would keep to one channel. And I feel like that's saying that when like it's quiet and there's peace in society, you should always be prepared for the worst, because that's when things are like in the process of developing, like a rebellion. Once it starts, it keeps going in society. When there's peace, and then it escalates into a war.
I feel like you can never let this control.
Yeah, you can never let it control.
Okay. Are we good on that question? Okay, so for the advantages and disadvantages, this is my kind of under Machiavelli law. We'll start off with disadvantages. One thing that I found is that Captain Graham mentioned in an earlier question of how his whole kind of principle or way of, or like justification for his actions is that the end justifies the means. So, or end justifies the means. So in other words, like he's going to do anything in order to have a successful rule, and if you're a citizen living under that, then you may face his kind of things. Like, if he's going to do anything to gain control, then sometimes you may be kind of in the path to his power, and you may find a lot of obstacles or like struggles that you may run into just because he's trying to increase his power.
It's like also like with one of his rules about keeping Machiavelli's rules with keeping your word. Like as a subject, I guess like it's kind of like he should only keep his word when it's like beneficial for him to. Like if it's gonna harm him, Machiavelli said, don't like you're not. If it's gonna hurt you in the end to not keep your word, then don't. I guess like a citizen living under that, it's like how to what extent can you actually trust like your leader?
Yeah. Like another disadvantage I thought was like when he says on page 47, a prince therefore must have no other object or thought, nor acquire skill in anything except war, its organization, and its discipline. So basically he's saying you should only be knowledgeable in war and things about war, which I think that it's important to know things about war, but you should also know other things like literature and math, because like war isn't always going on. So sometimes just that only knowledge about war is kind of useless. And, you know, it's also good to know other things.
So you think it's important to have knowledge of war, but also in the humanities?
Like other things too.
To go along with what you said, I feel like for a citizen in that time, if the ruler was always focused on war, then a lot of their interests might not be as important, like economic and the economy, and like how their personal interests may not be as greater importance as like the protection of the group as a whole. That might affect your individual stability.
I feel like, go ahead. I feel like your personal interests wouldn't be expressed to the government as much. Like you'd be very safe, probably, with the whole focusing on war and keeping the people safe and everything. But you wouldn't. I don't think you could get your own voice across as much, and if you didn't agree with your friends or whatever, there wasn't much you could do about it. So, not very beneficial for like personal gain. Well, going back to what Nick and you guys had said of how you saw being focused with war as a disadvantage, I personally saw it as more of an advantage, because if your ruler is focused on war and he's really skilled in it, then you can kind of guarantee your safety living underneath him, or like living under his rule. And I think that like how the disagreements between the three of us, or I mean, I think Claire, maybe you were kind of leaning towards like it being a good thing. Yeah. But like, I think this is a good example of how some things that are like are bad in one way are also really good in another way. Like one example is how Machiavelli suggests that if you come into rule of a new state, in some page 32, he says that violence must be inflicted once and for all. Obviously, if you're living under that, after like living under this ruler, it's going to be a bad thing to have violence inflicted on you. But then, in the end, it's a good thing that you know you'll have a stable country. So then that's a good example of how something can be good but bad at the same time.
I saw another advantage. I don't think the page number, but it's in chapter 18. It says there are two ways of contending, one in accordance with the laws, the other by force. The first of which is proper to men, the second to beasts. Which I interpreted to say that he would much rather do things by the books and through laws instead of just going out and causing wars with everyone, just to keep his faith in people and faith in their good natures.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I guess, like, another advantage was, like, kind of like that Machiavelli was, like, stressing that a ruler should try, like, most, like, not to be hated. And so if your ruler's trying not to be hated, although, like, he may use, like, cruelties and evil, but if a ruler is, like, ultimately, like, trying not to be hated, then you should be liking him, I think. And, like, obviously, like, you would want to like your ruler, so I think that would be an advantage.
And I had something similar to you, Diana, about how if obviously like, the whole goal of Machiavellian rulers is to attain as much power as possible. And I think that in any state or any rule you have to have the consent of the people. or else you're gonna find like there's a lot of difficulties that you might run into as a ruler. And so it's saying that, like Diana said, obviously your citizens are gonna want to like the ruler. The ruler's gonna want to have your trust, and he's gonna want to be liked by you. So I don't think he's necessarily always gonna go out of his way to like do something that's gonna anger his citizens, but I think he may think about them like having in the back of his mind, or he's making decisions a little bit more to think what would benefit them if he wants to be liked by them.
It seems kind of like it's all for show, though, like just to be deceptive, and I think it's mostly just to avoid a revolt, to avoid your people from like questioning you. So I don't know if it's really about like keeping your people's best interests in mind.
Yeah, well, we see it in modern day politics also. I mean, politicians will do anything to get elected.
A really good example of that is when Kennedy and Nixon were running for office, and Nixon felt really kind of intimidated by Kennedy, and so he felt like he had to basically choose like office to worry in that. And I feel like a lot of times rulers have a like, misconceived perception of the actual reality of people.
Yes, because Nixon resembled the corrupt politician, and Kennedy wasn't really a politician; he was an actor. And actually, that was the first time there was actual televised debates. Before that, people would listen to the debates on the radio, and they wouldn't actually see the person. And when the people saw Kennedy, he was all makeup, tan. He was very charismatic, and Nixon was over there sweating, pale. He was a dirty politician. So Nixon started to get behind, which led him to become even more of a corrupt politician.
But you got about a minute left.
Okay.
Let's move on to the last question real quick.
That's kind of like what we were talking about already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The main point that I put here is that obviously everyone needs to manipulate his appearances, if he wants to, because sometimes you don't always want to show your true self because your ulterior motives might not be really like, what you want people to see. But I think one that you can add in this question is how major social media affects the appearance of our rulers, or our government officials. But I mean, I don't know if you guys were considering that, but I mean, how big an effect that has on us, and yeah.
You know, like I think it was FDR, he was in a wheelchair or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So when he was televised, I think there's like almost no videos of him actually in the wheelchair. You can only see like from here up. So that's definitely like a big appearance thing, because you want to appear like confident and secure, and if you had a president in a wheelchair, it might not be a good image for your country.
It's also like, I guess, with like appearance, like it's like you never like you see the president, and so like Machiavelli like talked about how like most will only see like the appearance and not the reality. But it's like how many people like in our country today like have actually like met the president, or like gone and saw him like spoke, I guess, but like you see him on like TV or like making speeches, and like it's like you don't actually see him in reality, I guess. On media.
You can also see like modern day example on page 74. It says first opinion that is formed of the ruler's intelligence is based on the quality of men he has around him, which can be interpreted as the president's cabinet and his advisors. I mean, because if you have somebody in there who's not qualified for the job and just got it because of the spoil system that our government had in place for a while, and still has, you don't have the quality of people that you need in order to run the government.
All right. I'm gonna stop this.